Welcome back to From the Bookshelf, the show here on Studio 219, where I typically review books. But for today's episode, I'm actually going to be talking about bringing you in a little bit into my book collecting world, which I did for a Going Collecting episode, focusing a little bit more on some geeky books I recently picked up. Today, I want to talk about another section of my bookshelf. I have many bookshelves. Another section of my bookshelf devoted to collecting antique Christian literature. So before I get into this, let's go ahead and get all the YouTube stuff out of the way. Please, if you haven't yet already, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment of books that you like to collect, and hit that like button, so that way you can go back and rewatch this again some other time when you go through all those liked videos, because obviously everybody does that. No, we do not. But so today I want to talk about this fairly newer hobby of mine of collecting antique Christian literature. I have been collecting my entire life. That is not shocking given the fact that I do have, as I said, another show on here called Going Collecting. What I collect has changed over the years. Basically, my entire life, I have collected comic books. That would be the one consistent thing. But there's been phases of other things. I used to collect coins when I was a kid. I feel like every kid went through a coin collecting phase at one point. Hot Wheels was another big one for me when I was a little kid. Baseball cards, sports cards in general was a big thing for me when I was a little kid. Really, the sports cards went all the way through high school, if I'm being honest. Nowadays, I just buy Sammy Sosa cards. If I come across a Sammy Sosa card, that's what I'll buy. But some things come and go. Other things, a little bit more recently as an adult, I've gotten a little bit more into collecting records. I actually went back and started collecting Pokemon cards again. I had gotten rid of all my Pokemon stuff when I was younger, and just that has been clearly the nostalgia thing for me of going back and now rebuying Pokemon cards. And I have no idea how to play the game, but I know my my Gen 1 favorites, so I get those. There's even some things that I've changed a little bit. I used to collect Olympic memorabilia. Now it's a little bit more focused on the pins. I just get the pins for that I come across in the wild. Those are a pretty easy thing to get into, honestly, the pin collecting, that is. But one that has started fairly recently and is something that is relevant to you all book lovers out there is collecting antique Christian literature. So by way of antique, I will let the professional collectors out there correct me on this next part. But for me personally, when I use the word antique, what I am referring to is books published 1946 backwards. My cutoff is the start of the baby boomer generation. Why did I choose that? I just needed a date. I didn't want to be collecting all the way through to other years, even though I do, buy books from for other decades for other purposes. Every once in a while I come across a C.S. Lewis or a Tolkien that I don't have, and those are, 50s, 60s, 70s, all the way up to the modern era, newer books or writings of theirs gets published, right? So, but when it comes to the antique Christian literature part, I am focusing predominantly on books published 1946 and back for a few reasons. And none of them are really good. It's not bad or I'm here for the wrong reasons kind of thing, collecting these kinds of books. But a lot of the reasons why I've gotten into it is for very simple, very easy reasons that if you're out there and you're also into book collecting and you are of the Christian faith, or maybe if you're a part of other religious traditions, this might apply to you as well. My guess is that Christianity is going to be the easiest one for some of these things I'm going to say. But it seems like this kind of book collecting is really easy for me right now in my phase of life. That's kind of the big umbrella statement. But one reason why I'm really into collecting these kinds of books right now is the aesthetic. I love the feel and the smell of old books. I like going to antique stores, and part of that enjoyment is truly the smell that most antique stores have of like that old paper smell. I like how older books, hardcovers, how they feel, a lot of the colors, like the darker blues and reds and greens. Like I like it's aesthetically pleasing to me, and so it just looks really cool on my bookshelf. I'm going to say this right now. I am not collecting for value. Okay, so if you're out there and you're one of those people who's like, yeah, get me in on some new investment thing, I'm not collecting for value. I'm not going out of my way to try and get original stuff published by John Calvin or whatever. I will never be able to afford that. I will never be able to afford those kinds of things. But for me, a lot of this as a book lover, one reason I got into this is because as a book lover, I just like how these books look. My shelf, it's almost full now, this shelf that I have dedicated to it. It just looks good. When I walk into my study to get a pen, my laptop, whatever, I stop and I usually look at that shelf because I like how it looks. Another reason why I've gotten into antique book collecting, like I said, has to deal with the phase of life I'm in. Again, I'm not trying to collect for value. There's like an aesthetic thing going on here. And truth be told, I don't have a lot of money to like spend on hobbies right now. You know, I have been able to start going to Comic-Cons, which if you watch Going Collecting, you know that. I've been hitting the Comic-Con circuit a little bit more, way more than I have in the past 5 years. But I don't really have the money to drop like I used to when it comes to comic books. I used to spend quite a bit of money on comic books. And going to Comic-Cons has reminded me about just how hijacked the prices get at conventions. Like the people run up the price on these books exponentially when you go to a Comic-Con. Don't go to Comic-Cons to collect comic books unless you're looking for like really old, really hard to find things. Anyway, not why you're here. But it's a lot of the hobbies that I have had in the past, it's just kind of hard to do now, having a mortgage, a family, a kid, there's all the stuff paying off student loan debt, the whole thing, all the stuff that, other adults know. You have to go through a period of time, a long period of time where, you can't be as frivolous with your money. Being frivolous looks more like, hey, I'm going to treat myself to some Dunkin' this week. Not all week, but like once a week or that kind of a thing. When it comes to the antique books, the antique Christian literature, again, because I'm not really collecting for value, these are actually really easy to come by. If for some reason you're like intrigued by all of this, honestly, just start going to your local antique stores. You'll be able to find a booth or several booths with older books, just kind of peruse for a moment, and you'll start finding books that are a couple bucks, cheaper even, or you may even get lucky and come upon a situation where a church is just willing to give away books. That happened for me. A lot of the books in my collection that kind of helped get it really going was because I was ministering at a church and I was like doing weekly preaching there, and they needed help with other things. And one of them was they had just like stacks and stacks of books in a room. There was like 2 or 3 rooms with just like all these books. And they were like, can you help us sort through all this? Get it all organized. We're going to let the congregation take what they want, donate the rest, and you can have first pick as you're organizing. And that's where I ended up getting a lot of these books that have actually like really like filled out the collection that I have now, because they just wanted to get rid of them. Again, most of the books I have bought, I think the most expensive book that I have paid for was like $5. And every once in a while, I do check prices, even though, like I said, I'm not collecting for value, but I still, as I'm researching the books, I do make a note on as I'm finding like listings online or information online about value. And by and large, nothing really valuable. A couple books here and there that I got for free or paid a book for, and they're like $20 or $30. There was one that I paid a few bucks for, and it's actually valued at like $100. And again, this isn't all to brag about. I have this really brilliant way. You see those videos here on YouTube of like, I have this really brilliant way that you can make some money quick, and it's by buying antique books. Like, that's not the point here. I'm from the Midwest. I have to tell you about my deals. That's how it works. That's when you're listening to someone from the Midwest, we cannot tell you about stuff we have without making sure we got a good deal on it. That's just part of the thing here, okay? So yeah, like, it just kind of fits the phase of life I'm in. I don't really have a lot of money to give towards hobbies right now, as much as I want to, occasionally splurge and buy a nice new comic book for my collection, or, like I said, I buy vinyls and I buy records, and again, it's a similar thing to the books. Like, I'm not trying to collect for value, but every once in a while I'm like, oh, it would be nice to be able to have that, which is like, an $80 record rather than the $3 I usually pay. So there's that as well. It just kind of fits really well into, there's an aesthetic thing. It fits really well into just like my phase of life as somebody who just like inherently wants to collect things. I watched a lot of Indiana Jones when I was a kid. I imagine that's where this whole like this like interest in collecting comes from. I never collected stamps though, and I'm proud of it. I'm trying not to ever get into buying stamps. Anyway, one last reason why I'm really into collecting antique Christian literature, and then I promise I'm going to show you a few books. If you hung in here with me, I'm at 12 minutes now. If you've hung in here with me for 12 minutes now, yes, I will show you a few of the books in my collection now. That's what you're really here for as a book person, after all. But one of the other reasons why I'm really into this is probably for a really weird reason. It's probably the weirdest reason of them all. And it's because I watched the Netflix documentary series Murder Among the Mormons. So this one's been out for a few years, so I do not feel bad spoiling anything for anybody. But I watched it because I like learning about cults, and I thought maybe this was going to be like a true crime cult documentary. It definitely was true crime, but wasn't really like culty at all. Yes, it's about the Mormon church, so whatever. But basically, this is about a guy. It was like the 70s and 80s, I think, if I remember right. It's been like a year now since I've watched it. This guy out in Utah who became like basically the Indiana Jones of Mormon documents. He was able to he had all these like different connections, both domestically and internationally, with all these like renowned booksellers, and was able to find like all these like rare, very early on Mormon documents, books, pamphlets, whatever. And fun fact that I learned from this series, the Mormons really like their church history. They're really into it. So getting all of these documents was like this big thing, and like stuff started coming out in some of these documents that was like fundamentally different from the Mormon church, and was kind of like creating a bit of a scandal of like, what is the true teachings of the Mormon church if it's not what we've been saying, but what these documents are saying. This guy eventually starts finding, through his connections, starts discovering like all these other like lost documents, important books and pamphlets, again, of like other things like early founding fathers documents, the whole bit. And it's fascinating. There's like this true crime element, and then the big twist of a real life event. The big twist is the fact that this guy was a forger. Like, that was the big thing. This guy was forging all these documents, had this like really simple but yet very effective way to forge documents, and basically he was doing it initially to just mess with the Mormon church, and then it was also to make tons of money. And it's like the documentary series ends with this like disclaimer of like, it is actually not known for certain how many of his forgeries are still out there floating around and being circulated. That's how good this guy was at forging documents. Now, I'm into book collecting for everything but the part about forging documents. I'm not trying to become a book forger, okay? Not trying to forge a document and claim it's an old thing of John Calvin where he claims that, Jesus was a dragon or something ridiculous. Like, not trying to do anything like that. But the setup part, this like presentation and this like character that this guy eventually becomes of this, like, again, kind of like Indiana Jones, this like Jack Sparrow treasure hunter, has all these it's that thrill of the hunt. I think it just really fed that like book, that like collector part of me, of just like the thrill of, I'm gonna go to this place and I'm going to just see what I find. I used to have like really detailed lists of stuff that I want, and I kind of know, especially like in comic books world, like things that I like or things that I'm looking for. But anymore, I just kind of like go into these kind of situations with an open mind of like, let's just see what I find. Like it's more enjoyable just to kind of like watch and see, going to a bookstore I've never been to or one I've been to 1,000 times and just kind of perusing and seeing what I stumble upon. And I seem to find more enjoyment out of that than like the very serious, like, I will not rest until I get this specific issue kind of thing. So yeah, those are the reasons why I'm into collecting antique Christian literature. It just kind of it fits really well in my like phase of life right now. It definitely kind of has this like adventure, as lame as that may sound to people who don't collect books. It does have like an adventure feeling to me of like going and seeing what I'm going to discover next. And it's just like an aesthetic thing. I like how the books look on my shelf. Okay, so let's get into some of the books themselves. Now, I'm not going to show you the entire collection just because I don't want to pull every book off the shelf, but I'll share a few highlights. So first here we have Walks and Homes of Jesus by Reverend Daniel Marr. This book is the oldest book in my collection, copyright 1866. So here we go. You can take a look here. Pretty decent. I got this one actually a couple months ago. It's one of the newer editions. Everything is like, it checks out pretty well all the way through. Cover wise, the pages are all pretty well intact. They're worn, and there's kind of this like thin like tissue paper before there's ever like an image in the book, and the artwork is really nice too. It looks worn. It looks like it was used for study and reference. But yeah, this is the oldest one in my collection. Up next, we have one for the Chicagoland folks. This is 12 Select Sermons by D.L. Moody, copyright 1881. Obviously, being in the Chicago area, Moody is kind of a big deal. And from what I can tell, this is a first edition. It's kind of hard to tell sometimes with these older books what is a first edition and what is just really old. Also, sometimes the older the book, it seems like the harder it is to actually figure out if it's a first edition or like a fairly old, updated edition. Like I've had that a couple times where I've gotten a few books, and then when I sit down to really research it, I discover, oh, actually this is like a third edition, a fourth edition. It's something about like the covers a lot of times is what I'm discovering. Speaking of covers, this one is all in pretty good shape. See the binding there. Pages are all really intact. It is a very thin book. And yeah, if you shout out to the school that I did not graduate from, Moody Theological Seminary. Up next, we have one of the cooler books in my collection. I'm a big fan of this book, and it actually was a gift from my wife at Christmas, a couple Christmases ago, before I actually really started getting into the collecting aspect. There's a part of this book that she knew I would really like, but this is Biblical and Oriental Series. This is a series of books, The Recovery of Forgotten Empires by Samuel A.B. Mercer, who has several academic credits after his name. Copyright 1925. It's a book about Egypt. He's like a renowned, I did a little bit of research on him as I'm showing off the books, the book itself. He's a renowned Egyptologist, I guess you would say, and taught up in Canada. I forgot what school it was, but the reason why my wife bought it for me and why I think this is a really cool edition is because it's signed. She got this at she found it at an antique store, and it is signed by Mercer. So that's pretty cool. Only one in my collection right now that is signed by the author. One last one for you all before we wrap this video up. As every book reader and collector knows, just because you buy a book doesn't mean you're going to read them. I've not read any of those books, but there is one that I'm really interested in reading at some point, and that's the last one I want to show you all. This is Psychology of Religious Experience by Francis Strickland, copyright 1924. It's the title indicates, it's a psychological look at those times where people think that they are experiencing the Holy Spirit or other big religious moments. And this sounds like, and I'm sure there are more recent studies and books than 1924. This is a 100-year-old book I'm holding right now. I'm sure there are more recent studies that are more accurate or potentially updated, whatever the case may be. But it's that subject really fascinates me about what is the psychological, what is happening psychologically when we believe that we are having a religious experience. Not to downplay all religious experiences whatsoever, but to really understand what is going on, and to help better navigate when something is authentic and when maybe religious experiences are being manipulated or manufactured among ourselves. The book is in fantastic shape. It might be, out of every book in my collection, I do have a Book of Common Prayer in there that is in really good shape. This is probably the next one that is in the best shape, other than right there on the cover. If you can't tell, the lettering has faded, so you can feel it, but you can't really read it. But that's it when it comes to this video. Thank you for hanging with me. This went way longer than I thought it was going to. But if you're into antique book collecting or you're looking for a new book hobby, I really think this is if you're just looking for a fun hobby, not trying to make money and become a bazillionaire off of this kind of stuff, but if you're just looking for a hobby and you like books, truly give this one a try. I think the next step for me is trying to find a community, because I'm sure I'm not the only person who does this. So that's the next step for me, is trying to find a community of Christian literature book collectors to kind of get to know, learn a little bit more about the hobby, trade, maybe start discovering oh, I really like this subject or this author and that kind of stuff. So I'm excited to grow, and who knows, maybe in the years to come here on the channel, I'll pop back in at different points to highlight other newer additions. But that's it for me. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all in the next video.